When I first moved here, I lived in a shared apartment for 2 years, and it was a 1-bedroom that we flexed into 3 bedrooms.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Kind Not Nice podcast. This is Bianca and Grace. If you're new here, we talk about all things life, including living in New York, navigating career and love, and so much more. On this episode, we want to talk about kind of the things that are especially challenging. 2 that we want to highlight are around loneliness, living in the city, and also living in small spaces and tiny apartments. We also will touch on what makes it worth it still to live here for any of you who are interested in living here sometime in the future.
So just starting off, we're going to kick off with how long we've been living here. So I'm Grace, and context is that I've lived in New York for over 5 years now.
You grew up in Michigan and then moved over to New York after college,
That's right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then for me, I also have lived in New York for about 5 years. I have lived here since end of 2020. All right, so kicking it off, we're going to talk about the New York City Paradox, which is lonely in a city of 8 million. And so I'm curious, what are maybe some experiences that you've had where you might have felt lonely or alone in the city when you first moved here?
Yeah, I think living in New York, the city is so diverse, and I think the feeling of loneliness for me comes from I feel a lot more pressure living here because I'm always constantly in the rat race. So you are surrounded by that sort of pressure, and then you also have to everyone around you is chasing different goals and dreams. So I feel like the loneliness for me comes from feeling like no one around me maybe understands. Your friends understand and your community understands, but it's everyone is after something different and no one is truly on the exact same page about anything. Mm-hmm. So even though you're surrounded by millions of people, I feel like that is where loneliness could come in for me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. How about yourself?
I think where I can see it happening is because everybody is kind of moving at their own pace and often very quickly. You often hear the stereotype of no one is actually really caring about what you're doing, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
In a good way, in some ways, but also in other ways, it can lead to that feeling of loneliness because you might feel like you're kind of on your own boat sailing. So that can lead to the feeling of loneliness. And I think it can be difficult, especially when you first move here, when you have a city that's so large and there's so many people, but you don't really have a community yet, then it can be really challenging for newcomers. But it does take a lot of proactive effort to try to build that. But I feel once you've reached that point where you have a little network and that can grow, that's where that feeling of loneliness does start to dissipate over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the flip side of that is once you build a community here, you really don't want to move because the opportunities and how vibrant the city is, you kind of feel it's as good as it can get.
One way that the city doesn't necessarily always feel lonely is that I think everyone living in New York City understands the challenges of living here. Mm-hmm. So they all understand that, yes, prices are really expensive and that there are aspects of safety that everyone needs to be careful about, at least from a broader public point of view. I think most people we can consider good people, and so when it comes to crime and safety concerns, people are aware of it, and there is a mindset of safety in numbers within the city. And so there's kind of inherent feeling of support, even though it's not always visible to the naked eye, but there is an inherent feeling of support when you are out and about. There's going to be witnesses, there's always people walking around. And so I think from that lens, that takes away from that feeling of loneliness in some ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think going back to how you could feel lonely is everyone's on their own boat. You're charting your own course. And I think you have to ask. There's not really that feeling of community where everyone is trying to pull you along. If you're not willing to be along for the ride, no one is going to pull you along with them. That doesn't exist here. And if you need help, you need to actively reach out and ask for it. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's really a proactive component here. People are going to assume that you're fine on your own unless you say something.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was a valuable lesson for me too when I first moved to New York, was just like the lesson of asking for what you need and what you want.
Have to.
Yeah.
But because people here are pretty kind, as you say, like they will respond. In my opinion, they will respond actively as long as it's like a reasonable request and people are willing to help out.
Right.
So, in your opinion, what makes being lonely here feel different from being lonely elsewhere? I have a very clear-cut answer to this. Yeah.
I think the most obvious difference for me is because of just like the sheer number of people that live in New York and the population that's here. Physically, it feels a lot less lonely. So I feel like I can be alone by myself in my own thoughts, but like physically around me, like there's just so many people who are also on their way to doing their own things. Versus when in other cities where they might be more residential or more suburban, it's just you don't feel that like the numbers around you. And I think that just physical element creates a larger feeling of loneliness for me. So like, for example, when I lived in San Francisco, I definitely felt way more lonely there than I do in New York City, even though I spend a lot of alone time here as well. And I think the other part is because the geography of San Francisco, for example, is a lot more spread apart. So the ability to build community and have that easy access to community is a lot less than it is in New York. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I think loneliness feels different in New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
My answer to this is I feel like New York puts a lot of pressure on you. You're here for a reason and you're in the rat race and you're trying to achieve things. And so it's just like I think that sort of pressure can make you feel really lonely. Whereas I feel like in cities where there's less pressure, I don't know if it's like a combination of loneliness and anxiety, but like I feel like in other cities where there's less pressure, it to me doesn't feel as bad.
We had to have a flip point of view on that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it feels different, but like it doesn't feel as bad. Whereas I feel like in New York, like everything can go wrong all at once, and you just feel like an immense sense of like insecurity and pressure. Because surviving here is like pretty tough.
Do you feel like when all those things go wrong, you don't have like or you feel like it's harder to find a support system here than other places?
It feels like there's not, at least in my opinion, it's pretty hard to build a safety net here. Whereas if you lived, at least maybe because I'm not local, like my family's not here, so I feel like maybe if my family was here, like I would have a greater feeling of like there's a safety net to fall back on. But I think a lot of people move here without their family being here, and so that feeling of pressure and having no safety net, I think, makes things feel tougher and more lonely when things are so expensive.
And by safety net, you mean kind of like your community, like a family and like loved ones?
Yeah, like if you lose your job and let's say you still lived pretty near like your family, you could always move back in with your family. But in New York, you lose your job, you pretty much probably have a tough time paying rent. You have to leave the city. Yeah.
So it's like when things are bad, it's like kind of like a waterfall effect on other components of your life. And you almost need to have all these different elements like working in order for you to be able to stay in the city.
I think I've heard this fun saying where there's always a missing piece of the triangle in New York, which is like it's either your housing, your job, or your relationship, and like it's hard to get all three at once. Always something is going on in one of the three. That's like just anecdotal. So with all of that being said, what would you say surprises you the most about adult loneliness? Something that you maybe wouldn't have expected when you were younger?
I think how loneliness surfaces today for me, like as I've been here more in New York for a while and also now in my early 30s, I think loneliness surfaces in how people are just in different stages of their life. So It's no longer where we're like all in school or we're all starting out our careers. We're all trying to figure out our careers. I think especially going into late 20s, early 30s, people start diverging even more. Like some people are still focusing on their careers. Some are starting to think about marriage and families. Some are moving out of the city. And so because of all those different life stages, it can create this feeling of loneliness because you might not have the same like friend groups that can all relate to you in the same way. And I feel like that's what I've been experiencing more is just my different friend groups are in different stages of life. And so when you need something or if you're having trouble with something, they may not fully be able to support in the same way that another person would. And so finding the right community that's not all in the same place in life can be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to add on to that, something that I feel like I didn't understand maybe in college or in high school is that you will grow apart from friendships, especially if people are in different cities or if they're in different stages of life. And like they're still your friend. Like it's okay. It's just you maybe like don't spend as much time together as you did before.
Yeah.
And like I think I felt sad about that, especially when I first moved to New York, when all of my different friends moved to different cities. But I think it's just accepting that and like knowing you guys are still friends, and if you were in the same area, you will catch up and being okay with that.
Yeah, and I think it's also about being there for your friends in the large moments, the large milestones. Yeah, so like if that means like having a wedding or like being there when they have their first child or something like that, like those are all elements to still stay connected despite that loneliness. All right, so now that we've talked about the loneliness piece about living in New York, we also want to talk about another major pain point, which is rent. Living in New York City is difficult, partly because of the high rent that exists here. And oftentimes we might live in like odd apartments, tiny apartments, just to be able to live in the city. So I am curious for you if you could tell me about your living experiences. Like, what is the weirdest or smallest apartment that you've lived in, and what did that teach you?
So I think starting with the basics. So when I first moved here, I lived in a shared apartment for 2 years, and it was a 1-bedroom that we flexed into 3 bedrooms.
So crazy.
Yeah. So just for context, in New York, I think maybe also in San Francisco or in larger cities, there's this concept of a flex wall that you can put up to like make a fake room or like make a room out of like pre-existing living room space perhaps, so that you can make like a 2-bedroom apartment into a 3-bedroom apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment into a 2-bedroom apartment, something like that. We made a 1-bedroom apartment into a 3-bedroom apartment, and that was tiny. You had like this huge open air gap at the top where it wasn't even a full wall, but the rent was pretty affordable in the context of New York. I had decent natural light. The soundproofing was really bad. Like you could hear everything, but I was also close to work. I was like about a 5-10 minute walk from work. So all of that considered, would I do it again if I were first moving here? I would probably still take that deal again.
Yeah.
If you look at any of those house shows, like those big house shows, like the size, it was like half the size of one of those ladies' walk-in closets. Like it was really small. That was my room. And the other thing in New York that like I think people don't appreciate is you probably, especially if you live in a flex bedroom, you're not gonna have a lot of storage, and you won't even have like your own closet. So one of the things that is probably funny to viewers listening is I didn't have like my own closet when I first moved to New York because I lived in the smallest flex bedroom. And then in my second year I moved to the actual bedroom in the apartment. It was like a luxury to have a closet in my bedroom. So that was, I felt like I had made it once I had a closet.
Yeah. It's so funny, like when you start low, everything is just uphill from there, right? Like just going to a normal bedroom with a closet is like such a huge step up, and it makes you just
like, wow.
Yeah.
Closet.
Yeah. I think the concept of a flex room, very popular in New York. I also lived in a flex room. So my context when I first moved to New York was I had 2 other roommates as well. and I took the flex room. The funny thing is, I actually didn't know it was a flex room until I moved in completely. This was not told, like none of my roommates told me that I was going to move into a flex room.
But you didn't have a gap, right?
I didn't have a gap.
So it's not as obvious.
It wasn't as obvious.
So it's like easier to hide that. I think you can't hide it if there's a gap, but they maybe just,
Yeah, it's funny because when I moved in, I was like, why is my doorknob different from everyone else's doorknob?
Yeah.
Like, why does this wall just like seem like it's like I can like tear it, you know? And the door was just like not as sturdy as the other doors. So that's when I realized that it wasn't a real room. But I, very similarly to you, like I had enough natural light. Like I was happy with the room. I think natural light was just really important to me. And it was enough space that I could fit a bed, a desk, and also a clothing rack and a dresser. So I had my essentials. And then that was basically my closet. Like my clothing rack was my closet, basically. And I think that I think I was used to living in a flex space because in San Francisco, I also lived with other roommates too, and we also like split space. So I think it's just one of those things that you do when you live in a city and you're like more junior in your career and you're trying to figure things out in a new place. And if you want to save money, I think that's the right path to go. So now that we've talked about your space when you first moved here and the evolution of that, how do you think your space and like living in New York has really shaped your identity here?
Yeah, so I think, at least for me, the biggest transition was mental in terms of feeling like the first few spaces were very temporary and I wasn't willing to invest any time or like effort or even energy, to be honest, into them. And now moving into like a home where I feel like I really want to stay for the next 5 years or something like that, that sort of mental shift, I didn't realize how impactful it would be, but I think that has been the biggest mental shift in terms of like where I live, shaping my identity and how I view the space that I live in.
So it's kind of like the transition from temporary to more permanent feeling.
Like committing.
I think for me, it's really taught me the value of living more minimalist because living in New York with the small spaces, it just makes me treasure each belonging that I have individually versus trying to get multiple of like many different things. And so I think that transition to just really value a minimalist life is something that I just gathered more when I lived in New York. I think one thing I do is I still collect knickknacks, which can be a terrible waste of space. But I think in terms of just like functional things, I try to just value like individual things that I have and get quality over quantity. So now that we've talked about the challenge of rent and living in New York, we also want to talk about like why we continue to live here. And so for you, I'm curious what your perspective on like what keeps you staying here and why does New York continue to be worth it for you?
Yeah, I think it's two things. So one, I feel like there is no better place in the world, bar San Francisco maybe for tech, to have the best career opportunities and to be able to grow on your career and like be able to execute on your ambition. One, you're motivated by every single person around you, and two, I think it's just a very high density concentration of talent and opportunity. And then the other thing, I think what keeps me here is now that I've been here for many years, I feel like I've really built a strong community. And so I just feel like I can see everyone that I love. It's easy to see them. It only takes me like 30-40 minutes to get to one place or another. And people are very spontaneous and down to hang out, and there's always something new to do. So I think those two things are what keep me here.
Yeah, the community is such a huge part.
I think it's both of those things.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think for me, I feel like when I first moved here, a lot of it was like the novelty of like experiencing a new big city. And there's like so many elements of New York that are unique from other cities that I've been to. Now, how I characterize my experience living in New York is kind of like a more settled, like local feeling when I'm here. And so that novelty has more or less faded away. But the reason why I stay here is I think New York brings out a lot of positive things in me, like like in addition to what we talked about before, which was like making sure that you ask for what you need and making sure that you build your boundaries and you really create a sense of who you are. I think it also motivates me to continue like moving forward with my goals and dreams. And I think there's this like inherent feeling of just motivation that I get in like all aspects of my life when I'm living here, because we're surrounded by so many people who are also trying to be like ambitious and trying to move towards their goals. So I really like how the city brings that aspect out in me.
Yeah.
And when I'm in other cities, I feel a lot more stagnant. Like I don't feel as motivated to pursue things, just the nature of those cities. The second reason is you might hear this quote where in New York, you can be anybody, but in other cities, you have to be somebody. And I think that's really true in New York. Like no one really cares what you're trying to be, for better or for worse. But that also means like you have that flexibility and openness to be what you want.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely relate to that. I feel like I can be myself here. And if I want to go try something else, no one is going to judge me for trying something. Everyone here is trying something new. Everyone's a beginner at something. And like you just accept that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like another piece of the motivation, like you and I both talked about, is I think here you see what great looks like.
Yeah.
Like you see people who are at the top of their game, whereas in my opinion, like yes, you can see certain things of what great looks like at certain places where there are these specialties. Like for example, in Michigan you can see what like a really great auto engineer looks like, but like you won't see what great looks like across all of these different industries. And I think you know what the bar is when you live in New York across all these things. And I think it just motivates me to set the bar higher.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of high achieving people here, which is great.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you liked our content, please like and subscribe for more, and follow us on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube for more at Kind Not Nice Pod.
Great. See you next time.
Yeah.